Hi, my name's Romy. Cassie's on my bed, nearly asleep. And today we're going to be reviewing the fifth book in my 2019-10, and that is Inkheart by Cornelia Funke, or as I think it is actually pronounced, Funke. This book has my name and the date I got it in the inside. I first read this when I was 10. That's over a decade ago, which just, I remember walking into our local bookstore at the time, seeing this on the shelf, being intrigued, and then they had the sequel as well. Inkspell was out, and I ended up getting them both, and I was kind of like, oh, but what if I don't like the first one? And I got them both, and I loved Inkheart so much. It was this book that was unlike anything I'd ever read. Stories literally come alive, and it was so vibrant and intriguing, and I adored it. It was like nothing I'd ever read before. And this was kind of, and remains, one of the books that I think of when I think of what I want my own writing to be. I want my work to make people feel the way I felt when I read Inkheart. I want it to be as alive and vibrant and completely new. So Inkheart holds a very special place in my heart. I have read it a couple times. Whenever I've read Inkheart before, apart from the first time, because I don't really remember reading it, I just remember loving it, and it was this big book. I think it was the biggest book I had read at that time, because it's pretty hefty. I think it's like 500 and something pages. Let's see. Yeah, it's like 540 pages. So it was the biggest book I'd ever read. It is a pretty chunky book, and I remember reading it at different times, and I just remember always kind of struggling to get through it. Not because I didn't love it, but because it was just kind of big and a lot, maybe? I don't know. I'd always get a bit stuck. And it didn't diminish how much I loved it. It just was a big book to get through. And when I opened it this time, it was like under a week in, and I was a third of the way through, and I wasn't reading it aggressively. It just was flowing, and then it stopped flowing. And for about 2 months, I was a little over halfway through, and I just didn't feel like reading it. It just kind of stalled, because there's an awful lot of story in this book. The plot twists and turns, and exciting things happen, and then it slows down, and it gets a bit boring, maybe? I don't know. It slows down, we'll say. And then it gets exciting again, and then it slows down, and there's a lot of waiting, and there's a lot of things that happen that aren't the most important, and there's a lot in there. And I got a bit over halfway through, and then I didn't touch it. And I wanted to have it finished, but I didn't want to finish it because I was so keen on it anymore. I just wanted it to be finished, so it wasn't there waiting to be finished. So I ended up reading like 4 or 5 books in the interim. Amongst other books, I read The Princess Bride, which was another book on my 2019-10 list. And then I decided, right, it's been long enough. You're finishing it. And I did. I feel like there's a lot that wasn't really necessary, and I feel like it could probably be a more enjoyable book if certain elements were cut. I think there's probably maybe 100, maybe 200 pages that I didn't feel were necessary, but would it be the same book? Absolutely not. It wouldn't be the book that I remember being this big book, this really special book, because it was bigger than any book I'd ever read. It wouldn't have the details, it wouldn't have a certain amount of the magic. It would be faster, and I probably wouldn't get stuck in it, but it wouldn't be the same. I don't really know how to go about a review of this book. It's been a while since I've done reviews. I just filmed my review of The Princess Bride, and I didn't make any notes as I was reading these two books, which I did for the other books I was reviewing. So I don't have anything to kind of go off, so I'm just going off what's in my head, which probably should have written some stuff down. Was Inkheart how I remembered it? Yes and no. It has this same feel of magic to it, and there were scenes that I remembered exactly as they were. There was also stuff that I didn't remember. There's also like a dark tone to it, with kind of very dark references. A lot of the book is based in this place called Capricorn's Village. Capricorn is the villain of the book, and his village is this abandoned village in the mountains of Italy that is run by black jackets, which are just his cronies. And all of the kind of menial work is done by these maids, these women that have been read out of stories, or I think there's reference to them being taken from villages. And there are a few references throughout as to the black jackets picking their favourites among the women. There's also references to Maggie being a pretty young girl and when she was a bit older, and references to what would happen to her then, which was quite sinister. There's references to women being the favourites of some of the men. All of these women are very cowed by fear. Is cowed the right word? Cowled? They don't live happily or freely. They are prisoners. I remember reading and realising that that's a reference to rape. And when I read this as a 10-year-old, I didn't know what rape was. All the other times I've never noticed it, or maybe I still didn't know. But this time I knew what that reference was. And in reading some of Cornelia's other work, I've definitely noticed a darkness to it that I didn't notice whenever I first read those books. But it was still really surprising to me in Inkheart, because I do very much think of it as a children's book. And to be a book that is readable by many ages, it doesn't have to have sinister overtones. It doesn't have to have this darkness to it. I didn't really feel like any of that added to the plot. It was never really gone into enough. It was just these kind of side notes of darkness that made me pretty uncomfortable. The characters were, and again, weren't how I remember them. Maggie I absolutely loved and wanted to be as a child, and she is a pretty brilliant character, but she is also very ordinary. At times I found her quite irritating and she's a bit whiny, but she's just a child, and I can appreciate that as its brilliance of it's just a story about a girl. But I also don't always want to read about just ordinary people. I want to read about the fantastical people. And I remember Maggie being so much more than what she was. And I think there's a goodness to that, because it's more realistic maybe to have a character who's just normal and ordinary and special because she's normal and ordinary, and relatable is the word I'm looking for. But I just remember her being a bit more, being someone I aspired to be like, and I don't aspire to be like Maggie anymore. She was not as interesting as I thought she was, and she was not as marvellous as I remembered her being. I loved all of these characters, to be honest, other than Eleanor and Capricorn, when I first read this book, and I didn't love all of them this time. Dustfinger is probably the one character who I just love. I have such an attachment to Dustfinger, and it didn't really bother me too much that he's such an unreliable character. Dustfinger is a character who is read out of Inkheart, the book within this book, and he just wants to get back. And Dustfinger's willing to do anything, good or bad, to get back into that book. And that is a part of his character that is pretty well explored, and I just felt like he was really fully written and realised, and I didn't feel like that with a lot of the characters. I think truly Dustfinger was the only one. A lot of the characters have very single goals, and Dustfinger has a very single goal, but it's evident why, and that's definitely not mostly the case. So Inkheart, this book I'm reviewing by Cornelia Funke, tells the story of a book called Inkheart, which is by Fenolio, and I can't remember his last name. And characters have been read out of this book, Inkheart. And Inkheart, the book I'm reviewing, is the story of these characters that have been read out of it. Oh, it's pretty multi-layered, and it is the most wondrous of stories. And I am pretty keen to read Inkspell and Inkdeath, the sequel and final book in the series, just because I enjoy the ideas and the storyline so much. And I feel like that's it for me. I enjoy the idea of this book so much. It definitely doesn't always prove to be the most brilliant thing I've ever read. I felt disappointed at times, and I definitely wasn't as invested as I wished I had been. But throughout, it's one of the most original ideas that I've ever read, and I have this intent fondness that I will never lose because of how much I loved it as a child and how much it meant and will always mean to me. It's a story of characters that come to life, and they truly come to life, and it's just brilliant, and it makes me so happy. So even though I didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to, I still enjoyed it. While Inkheart features very few female characters, there are about 4 in total who are actually given names. It is kind of told from the perspective of Maggie, and that was something I really loved and connected to as a child, and I really appreciate it now. A lot of the chapters also are told by Eleanor, her aunt, Dustfinger, some are told by a boy called Farad, and some are told by Mo. But really the story is told by and is about Maggie. And while I didn't always like her, she had a pretty good story to tell. We also get to know a woman called Reza, who we get to know more in later books, but a little bit in this. We get to know Eleanor, who is Maggie's aunt, who I love. Whom I love. And she is more fleshed out and more brilliant than I remembered. And we also get to know a character called the Magpie, who is a nasty character. And we get to know her a little bit, and I think we get to know her more in the other books, and I don't really have much to say about her. As for diversity, there's really not very much. The book is set in Italy, and we meet a couple of Italian characters. And we also meet a boy called Farad, who's read out of the book Arabian Nights, the 1001 Stories of Arabian Nights? I can't remember what the book's called. 1001 Nights, I think. And he, again, gets more fleshed out in further books, but he gets a little bit of page time in this, and a few references to his story. Are there any queer characters? No. So, whoa, nearly fell over. Inkheart, a brilliant, brilliant book that has food on it, that I certainly did not love as much as I wished I did, but will always hold a very special place in my heart. It's a pretty darn magnificent book with a story that is so unique, even though it's sometimes lapsed. And that is all from me for now.